Sir, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, I need your identification and proof of legal status right now.
I'm Lieutenant William Roberts, Phoenix Police Department.
Everyone has a story. Documentation required now or you're detained. This is racial profiling. No reasonable suspicion beyond my
You're
speaking.
resisting. This is unlawful detention.
The body cameras were already rolling when the three federal agents crossed the sun-bleached asphalt of the Shell station. Their target stood at Pump 7, finishing what should have been an ordinary stop for gas. What happened in the next 11 minutes would cost the United States government $13.9 million, and expose a conspiracy that reached far beyond one detained man at one Phoenix gas station. If you believe federal agents shouldn't be allowed to detain citizens without cause, that whistleblowers deserve protection instead of punishment, and that racial profiling has no place in law enforcement, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and whether you think Roberts should have complied or stood his ground. Your engagement tells YouTube this story matters, that accountability matters, and that stories like this need to reach people who still believe justice is possible. Because what happened to William Roberts could happen to any of us. The asphalt shimmered under Phoenix sun, heat rising in visible waves across the Shell station parking lot on McDowell Road. At Pump 7, Lieutenant William Roberts squeezed the last drops of premium into his F-150, the nozzle clicking its completion at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning that would reshape his understanding of the system he had served for 2 decades. He wore civilian clothes, basketball shorts, a Phoenix Suns t-shirt faded from too many washes, sunglasses against the desert glare. The overnight shift had drained him. 12 hours of paperwork, patrol coordination, and the grinding bureaucracy of middle management in a metropolitan police department. Home waited 15 minutes away. Coffee first, then sleep. The white government SUV pulled in behind him, silent except for the crunch of tires on sun-softened pavement. 3 agents emerged with the synchronized precision of a tactical unit executing a practiced maneuver. The lead agent, Derek Fletcher, moved with bureaucratic certainty, his immigration and customs enforcement patches visible on body armor worn over a polo shirt. His partners, Rafael Gomez and Sophia Klein, flanked wide to Roberts's left and right, their spacing deliberate, their body cameras recording red lights blinking in the harsh light. Roberts's cop brain processed the formation before Fletcher closed half the distance. Containment tactics. Corralling pattern. Hands hovering near weapons. Body language broadcasting threat assessment already completed, target already classified. Fletcher stopped 3 feet away, close enough to assert authority, far enough to maintain tactical advantage. The agent announced his agency affiliation and stated the station required identification and proof of legal status. He cited a sweep of the area for illegal employment, his tone flat, rehearsed, empty of inflection that might suggest uncertainty or room for negotiation. Paperwork was required immediately. Roberts removed his sunglasses with deliberate slowness, movements designed to telegraph harmlessness, to communicate compliance without submission. 23 years on the Phoenix Police Department had taught him the fragile physics of confrontation, how sudden motion around armed officers transformed routine stops into tragedies. He identified himself calmly, lieutenant with Phoenix PD, badge secured in the truck 15 feet behind him. The words carried no plea, no request for special treatment. Simple statement of fact stripped of the anger already kindling in his chest. Fletcher's skepticism arrived pre-packaged, worn smooth by repetition. He dismissed the claim, asserting that everyone had a story to tell. Documentation was required now, or Roberts would face detention for processing. Gomez drifted to Roberts's right, Klein to his left. The triangle tightened, geometry of control constricting around a man whose only crime was pumping gas in his own city while wearing his own team's jersey. Roberts felt the familiar burn rising, the particular fury of being reduced to suspicion based on melanin content. He offered to retrieve his wallet, moving with exaggerated care, 2 fingers only, no sudden gestures that might trigger catastrophe. The Arizona driver's license emerged from his back pocket. Current, legal, bearing his Glendale address and a photograph that matched the face before them. Fletcher examined it with theatrical disinterest, then pocketed it with the casual authority of someone accustomed to taking whatever seemed useful. Fletcher declared the license insufficient for proving citizenship. He demanded a passport, birth certificate, or naturalization papers, something establishing Roberts's right to exist in this country. The dismissal landed like a physical blow. Roberts had been born in Tucson. His father before him. His grandfather in New Mexico when it was still territory before statehood, before Arizona existed as anything more than lines on contested maps. His family had been American longer than most of the country's current borders had been drawn. Roberts asserted his natural-born citizenship, his position as police lieutenant, and requested permission to retrieve his badge from the vehicle. The words came harder now, controlled but edged with steel. Fletcher's response arrived predetermined, inevitable as the heat rising from asphalt. No movement would be permitted. Processing was required. Verification would occur downtown. Roberts needed to accompany them now or face detention. Roberts questioned the grounds for detention, asking what reasonable suspicion existed beyond the color of his skin. The question hung in the superheated air between them. Around them, the gas station had transformed into theater. Phones emerged from pockets, cameras lifting to capture the spectacle of 3 federal agents surrounding one man at a fuel pump. A woman 3 pumps over held her device steady, recording. A man emerging from the convenience store paused, witness materializing where none had been needed moments before. Gomez cited intelligence about operations in the area, his camera recording Roberts's expression, the controlled fury barely restrained behind professional composure. The agent claimed authority to verify the status of individuals they encountered. Roberts recognized the coded language. Intelligence translated to, brown man at gas station equals reasonable suspicion. Demographics as evidence. Skin tone as probable cause. Fletcher's hand moved to handcuffs as he issued a crisp command. Roberts was ordered to turn around and place his hands behind his back. Detention pending verification. Roberts planted his feet against asphalt soft enough to hold boot prints. His hands remained visible, elevated but not raised, position communicating non-aggression while refusing compliance. The voice he used came from 2 decades of command authority, projecting across parking lot to phones recording, to witnesses watching, to body cameras capturing every frame for future litigation. He narrated his own detention for the record, stating he was not resisting or fleeing. He invoked his Fourth Amendment rights, noting no reasonable suspicion had been articulated and no probable cause demonstrated. He identified himself again as a Phoenix Police Department lieutenant and provided his badge number, 2847. He warned that hands placed on him without cause would constitute assault on a peace officer. The words achieved their purpose, creating legal record, establishing resistance as constitutional rather than criminal, forcing hesitation into Fletcher's certainty. 30 seconds of standoff stretched thin across the morning heat. 3 federal agents, 1 man, multiple cameras, traffic slowing on McDowell to observe confrontation whose outcome seemed predetermined. Fletcher made his decision, the one that would eventually cost his employer $13.9 million and transform one gas station stop into precedent taught in academies and law schools across the country. He declared the subject was resisting detention and ordered his partners to secure him. The command came clipped, certain, catastrophically wrong. They moved simultaneously, Gomez and Klein seizing arms while Fletcher produced handcuffs. Roberts offered no assistance, becoming dead weight without active resistance, forcing them to maneuver his body while he continued narrating for cameras, for witnesses, for the inevitable litigation already taking shape in his cop brain. His statement emerged clear despite physical handling. He repeated that he was not resisting but being assaulted by federal agents without reasonable suspicion or probable cause. He stated his name and badge number again, declared his United States citizenship, and asserted the detention was unlawful. The handcuffs clicked tight enough to compress circulation, metal biting into wrists that would bear marks for days afterward. Fletcher's body camera recorded the process, captured Roberts's face, documented the precise moment a 23-year police veteran was treated as criminal for the offense of existing while black at a gas station in his own jurisdiction. They walked him past staring customers, past the woman still recording, past the man on his phone audibly reporting the arrest of someone claiming police affiliation, credibility uncertain, situation confused. Roberts craned his neck toward his F-150, still parked at the pump, keys in ignition, badge and service weapon secured in console. He voiced concern about his unsecured vehicle. Fletcher assured him they would handle it, his response carrying no weight, no promise, no intention of meaningful action. Translation: nothing would be handled. The SUV's rear compartment smelled of fear and sweat accumulated from dozens of prior detainees, the cage separating front seats from back preventing any contact with agents now climbing into driver and passenger positions. Klein sat beside him, maintaining visual custody, ensuring compliance no longer in question. Roberts spoke directly to the cameras he knew were recording, statement emerging with the precision of someone building legal foundation brick by brick. He provided the timestamp and stated his identity, citizenship, and the violation of his rights. He declared the detention unlawful and made an implicit promise. They would answer for everything captured on these recordings. The vehicle pulled away from the Shell station, leaving Roberts's truck vulnerable at the pump, abandoning his weapon and badge to whatever fate awaited unsecured police property in public space. The ride to the ICE field office consumed 28 minutes. Roberts spent them in controlled silence after his initial statement, breathing deliberately, anger managed but not diminished, cop brain already cataloging evidence, anticipating procedures, preparing for the bureaucratic gauntlet ahead. The secured garage of the ICE field office swallowed the SUV into fluorescent-lit concrete, away from Phoenix sun and witness phones and the accountability that daylight sometimes provided. Roberts remained handcuffed as they walked him through intake, past other detainees in various stages of processing, past agents moving with the efficient boredom of bureaucracy executing another day's quota. The holding room measured 10 feet by 10, concrete walls painted institutional beige, metal bench bolted to floor, no windows, single door with reinforced frame. Fletcher removed the handcuffs with mechanical efficiency, informing Roberts that someone would attend to him shortly. The words carried the hollow promise of all detention facilities everywhere. Roberts rubbed circulation back into wrists marked red from metal compression. He suggested they call his precinct to verify his identity and end this catastrophic error before it metastasized into something requiring lawyers and litigation. The suggestion emerged calm despite 3 hours of constitutional violation already underway. Fletcher insisted on proper channels and verification through established procedures. He cited protocol adherence as necessity. The door closed with finality that echoed in the small space. Alone now, Roberts sat on metal cold despite desert heat outside these walls. He had been in rooms like this before, on the other side, interviewing suspects, working cases, inhabiting the system's enforcement apparatus rather than being processed through it. The irony settled heavy as the handcuff marks on his wrists. 2 decades serving this system. Now sitting on its metal bench, treated like someone who had crossed borders illegally rather than someone born in Tucson with roots predating statehood. Outside the door, the hum of bureaucratic activity continued. Phones ringing, agents conversing, machinery of enforcement grinding through Tuesday morning business. No one came. No one explained. Just isolation and waiting and the growing certainty that somewhere, someone would eventually realize they had made a mistake whose cost would exceed any reasonable calculation. The first hour passed with Roberts mentally cataloging evidence. Body camera footage from 3 angles. Witness recordings from gas station bystanders. His own statements clearly invoking Fourth Amendment protections. Lack of reasonable suspicion articulated by agents. Detention without probable cause. Vehicle left unsecured with weapon inside. Each violation added to the list building in his mind, foundation for litigation already taking shape. The second hour brought deeper frustration. The particular anger of powerlessness experienced by someone accustomed to authority now stripped of it entirely. They knew his name. They had his license. They could verify his identity with one phone call. Yet procedure demanded he sit here, waiting, dehumanized by a system supposedly designed to protect citizens exactly like him. At 12:43, 3 hours and change after the gas station stop, the door finally opened. Supervisor Harlan Reed entered first, rank insignia marking him as someone empowered to make decisions, followed by Fletcher wearing the expression of someone wishing he was anywhere else on earth. Reed's voice carried careful neutrality, words chosen to minimize liability while acknowledging unavoidable reality. He announced the situation had been addressed and Roberts's identity verified. Release was authorized. Transport would be arranged back to his vehicle. Roberts's response emerged flat, stripped of emotion that might undermine the legal record he was still building. Verification had been completed, meaning they had finally called Phoenix PD and confirmed he was exactly who he claimed at the gas station 3 hours ago. 23-year veteran. Lieutenant. Natural-born citizen. Detained for the crime of pumping gas while brown. Reed attempted conciliation, stating that procedure had been followed for status verification. He extended an apology for any inconvenience caused. The word landed like insult added to injury. Inconvenience. Translation. Minor disruption, forgettable moment, nothing warranting consequences. Roberts pressed back, voice controlled but relentless. He stated their procedure had detained American citizens without suspicion, had ignored when someone identified as law enforcement, had left vehicles unsecured for hours. This had turned inconvenience into federal civil rights violation. Silence answered, the kind that emerged when any response would only deepen liability already accruing. Roberts issued demands now, no longer requesting. He wanted body camera footage copies, names and badge numbers of all agents involved, a formal incident report, and articulation of reasonable suspicion justifying the initial stop beyond demographic profiling. Reed's promise arrived hedged, minimal, designed to provide the least documentation law required. He assured Roberts that appropriate paperwork would be provided, which meant lawyers would fight for every scrap of evidence, nothing volunteered, everything subpoenaed. The return ride unfolded in uncomfortable silence, Reed driving, Roberts in back without handcuffs this time but still treated as cargo rather than colleague, professional courtesy extended only after detention became indefensible. His F-150 remained at the Shell station, somehow not towed despite 3 hours of occupying pump space. Roberts checked the console. Badge still present. Service weapon still secured. Nothing obviously disturbed beyond the fundamental violation of having his vehicle left vulnerable while he was detained without cause. He stood in the parking lot where this had started, breathing Phoenix heat, processing rage and humiliation and the crystallizing certainty that this required more than department complaints, more than professional grievance. This demanded litigation, demanded accountability, demanded that these agents and their agency answer for every minute of unlawful detention. Phoenix Police Headquarters accepted him still wearing basketball shorts and Suns t-shirt, past officers who noticed his expression and gave space, up to Captain Elias Grant's office where he recounted everything with the precision of someone documenting evidence. Grant's reaction progressed from concern to fury as details accumulated. He questioned what justification existed for detention, why Roberts had been held for 3 hours despite identifying himself, why his vehicle had been left unsecured with weapon inside, why constitutional rights had been ignored from first contact through release. Grant reached for his phone before Roberts finished, declaring immediate escalation. The chief needed notification. A lawyer needed consultation. This was federal civil rights lawsuit territory, beyond department internal process. The lawyer Roberts hired specialized in federal overreach, Rebecca Landon, with reputation built suing agencies that believed authority exempted them from constitutional constraints. She listened to his account, requested body camera footage under Freedom of Information Act, and within 8 weeks had assembled litigation that made Department of Homeland Security attorneys reassess their career choices. The footage proved damning across 3 synchronized angles: Roberts being stopped without articulated suspicion, detained despite identifying himself, handcuffed despite invoking constitutional protections, transported despite repeatedly asserting citizenship. Audio captured his statements, his badge number, his request for verification with his department, and their refusal until after processing him through their system like someone caught crossing borders rather than someone born here. Lieutenant William Roberts vs. United States of America, Derek Fletcher, Rafael Gomez, Sophia Klein. The complaint alleged unlawful detention, false imprisonment, Fourth Amendment violations, racial profiling, civil rights deprivation under color of law, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Evidence attached in hundreds of pages. Body cameras, witness statements, phone records, service records, birth certificate proving citizenship. Airtight case of wrongful detention. But discovery would reveal something deeper, something that transformed simple profiling into calculated retaliation. Landon filed the lawsuit 4 months after the gas station stop, complaint landing on federal desks with the weight of evidence too substantial to dismiss through procedural maneuvering. The allegations read like constitutional law textbook examples of violations: detention without reasonable suspicion, seizure without probable cause, profiling based on demographic characteristics, denial of rights despite clear invocation. Government attorneys reviewed the body camera footage and recognized immediately what juries would see: 3 federal agents detaining a police lieutenant who identified himself clearly and repeatedly, who complied without resistance while asserting constitutional protections, who was handcuffed and transported despite presenting identification and offering verification through his department. The settlement offer arrived quickly. $75,000. Standard calculation for inconvenience and emotional distress, amount designed to close cases without admitting wrongdoing. Landon's response contained one word transmitted to government counsel with unmistakable finality: no. Discovery phase began with subpoenas reaching deep into ICE records, demanding not just body camera footage but internal communications, operational planning documents, surveillance logs, anything related to the Shell station stop or Lieutenant William Roberts. What emerged transformed the case from racial profiling into something more sinister, more calculated, more damning than simple bias in enforcement. ICE had been tracking Roberts for weeks before the gas station stop. The surveillance logs showed his routines documented, his shift patterns recorded, his regular stops noted with particular attention to the Shell station on McDowell Road where he typically fueled his F-150 after overnight shifts. Email chains discussed someone identified only as the PD complainer without naming Roberts directly, using language carefully crafted to suggest legitimate investigation while avoiding explicit admission of targeting. The reason crystallized through months of document review. 3 months before his detention, Roberts had filed internal complaints about unauthorized collaboration between Phoenix PD and immigration enforcement, operations that violated Arizona's sanctuary policies, joint raids targeting undocumented families without warrants, intelligence sharing that fostered community distrust and enabled civil rights abuses. His reports had irritated interagency relations, prompted uncomfortable questions from city attorneys, threatened collaborative programs that existed in policy gray zones where federal authority and local restrictions overlapped with convenient ambiguity. The gas station sweep had never been about illegal employment. Intelligence about unauthorized workers at the Shell station was fabricated pretext, justification created after the fact to legitimize what was fundamentally an intimidation operation designed to silence a whistleblower whose complaints threatened profitable agency partnerships. Flashback sequences emerged through depositions and document review. Roberts had testified about joint operations where IC agents accompanied Phoenix officers on patrol, using local law enforcement presence to intimidate immigrant communities. His reports documented families detained during traffic stops that escalated into immigration enforcement actions. His complaints detailed warrantless entries into homes where federal agents piggybacked on local police welfare checks. His warnings had addressed community trust erosion, constitutional violations disguised as interagency cooperation, and sanctuary policies being undermined through informal partnerships that existed nowhere in official memoranda but everywhere in actual practice. The emails proved coordination at supervisory level. Fletcher's team had been tipped to Roberts's routines, given his shift schedules, directed to conduct verification operations in areas where the complaining lieutenant was known to frequent. The intelligence justification was reverse-engineered after they selected their target. This revelation elevated the lawsuit from profiling to institutional corruption, from individual agent misconduct to systemic retaliation against whistleblowers who challenged federal overreach. Roberts's fight was no longer just about his own detention. It became exposure of how agencies weaponized enforcement authority to silence internal critics. The government returned with a second settlement offer. $300,000. Significant increase suggesting awareness that trial would be catastrophic. Landon rejected it with prejudice. Her response to government attorneys carried no ambiguity. Their agents had not just profiled a police lieutenant based on skin color but had targeted him specifically to silence his complaints about illegal collaborations. They had ignored his rights, detained him without cause and fabricated justification after selecting their target. Every layer of the case revealed deeper corruption. The case would proceed to trial where a jury would determine appropriate accountability. Roberts prepared for testimony while the case consumed his life beyond official duties. Nightmares featured handcuffs tightening until his hands went numb, body cameras recording his humiliation in permanent documentation. Hypervigilance developed, every routine stop for gas now carrying tension that hadn't existed before federal agents decided his citizenship required proving. Captain Grant provided support, mobilizing off-duty colleagues who attended court hearings in uniform, solidarity demonstration that one of their own had been violated by federal overreach that could target any of them. The case became symbol, Roberts's detention representing every interaction where authority exceeded constitutional bounds, where profiling masqueraded as legitimate investigation, where retaliation punished those who dared challenge systemic abuses. Media attention grew as trial date approached, national coverage transforming local case into broader conversation about immigration enforcement, whistleblower protection, racial profiling, and the fragility of rights when agencies decided individuals had become problems requiring neutralization. Government attorneys watched evidence mount and recognized approaching disaster. Body cameras showing unlawful detention. Internal documents proving premeditation and targeting. Surveillance logs demonstrating weeks of tracking. Email chains discussing neutralizing the PD complainer. Every piece reinforcing narrative that Roberts was detained not for legitimate enforcement reasons but because he had exposed illegal collaborations the agencies wanted to continue without scrutiny. Landon pressed forward, rejecting further settlement overtures, insisting that trial would expose every layer of corruption, that jury would see exactly how federal agents abused authority to silence someone who refused to ignore constitutional violations conducted under color of law. 19 months after the gas station stop, trial commenced. The courtroom in downtown Phoenix filled before proceedings began, off-duty officers occupying rows in dress uniforms, civil rights organizations sending representatives, national media establishing coverage positions for a case that had evolved beyond local incident into precedent-setting litigation. Day 2 brought the body camera footage, 3 angles synchronized on courtroom screens so jury watched from multiple perspectives simultaneously. The footage showed Roberts being approached at the gas pump, identifying himself clearly as Phoenix PD lieutenant, offering to show his badge. Fletcher dismissed his claims, demanding citizenship documentation beyond state-issued driver's license. Tension escalated as Roberts questioned reasonable suspicion, accused agents of racial profiling, and invoked Fourth Amendment protections. The footage showed him being handcuffed despite not resisting, narrating the violation for the record, maintaining composure while being treated like someone caught crossing borders illegally rather than someone born in Tucson with family roots predating Arizona statehood. Several jurors visibly reacted, heads shaking slowly, expressions hardening as they watched federal agents ignore every word Roberts spoke, dismiss his offered verification, detain him based on nothing more than demographic profiling disguised as enforcement sweep. Day 5 delivered the bombshell that transformed straightforward profiling case into exposure of institutional corruption. Landon's team presented internal memos, surveillance logs, and email chains discussing someone identified as the PD complainer and language about neutralizing his effectiveness without explicitly naming Roberts but clearly referring to someone filing complaints about unauthorized ICPD collaborations. The jury saw how the intelligence about illegal employment at the Shell station was fabricated after Fletcher's team selected their target. They saw how agents had tracked Roberts for weeks, documenting his routines, noting his regular fuel stops, preparing justification they would invoke only after detaining him. The pretext collapsed under documentary evidence. This was never about enforcement. This was retaliation against a whistleblower who had exposed illegal collaborations, who had filed reports about constitutional violations, who had threatened interagency programs that existed in policy gray zones where federal authority and local restrictions overlapped with profitable ambiguity. Roberts testified for 9 hours across 4 days, walking jury through his career, commendations, promotions, 2 decades of service protecting Phoenix residents. He described the gas station humiliation, the controlled fury of being profiled in his own city, the fear that situation might escalate into violence, the 3 hours in federal holding cell being treated like someone without right to exist in country where his family had been American before Arizona was state. But the testimony went deeper now, addressing the retaliation motive. He detailed his complaints about unauthorized collaborations, about joint operations targeting undocumented families without warrants, about intelligence sharing that fostered community distrust, about sanctuary policies being undermined through informal partnerships that violated city directives. He explained how those complaints had irritated interagency relations, how his reports had prompted uncomfortable questions, how speaking up about constitutional violations had made him target for agencies that wanted compliance rather than accountability. The message to jury was clear. Federal agents detained him not because they believed he was in the country illegally, but because he had exposed their illegal operations and they wanted to make an example, to demonstrate what happened to whistleblowers who challenged their authority. Landon's cross-examination of Fletcher dismantled whatever remained of the defense. She walked him through the intelligence justification, vague, non-specific, impossible to verify, created after they had already selected Roberts as target. She presented the surveillance logs showing weeks of tracking, proving they knew exactly who he was before approaching him at the gas station. Fletcher struggled for responses that wouldn't sound like admission of targeted harassment. He attempted to claim the demographic profiling was reasonable based on area intelligence. He could not explain why intelligence about illegal employment at a gas station justified demanding citizenship papers from a police lieutenant pumping gas into his F-150. The surveillance logs destroyed his credibility entirely. Jury watched him struggle through explanation of why federal agents had documented a police lieutenant's routine stops, his shift patterns, his regular fuel purchases, documentation that served no legitimate enforcement purpose but made perfect sense as preparation for retaliation operation. Deliberations consumed 8 days. Jury requested repeated review of body camera footage, internal emails, and surveillance logs. They emerged with verdict that sent electricity through packed courtroom. The jury found for Roberts on all counts: unlawful detention, false imprisonment, Fourth Amendment violations, racial profiling, civil rights deprivation under color of law, Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Every allegation sustained by evidence too overwhelming to dismiss. The damages phase extended another 12 days. Jury heard about Roberts's nightmares, his hypervigilance at routine stops, his inability to trust federal law enforcement or even his own department's partnerships with agencies that had targeted him for retaliation. Captain Grant testified about the incident's impact on Roberts's work performance, his relationships with other officers, his faith in the system he had served for 2 decades. A psychologist detailed PTSD symptoms specific to law enforcement officers who become victims of the system they serve, betrayal trauma compounded by realization that even badges don't protect against targeted retaliation, that speaking up about corruption makes you vulnerable to the very agencies supposedly bound by constitutional constraints. The jury announced damages that silenced the courtroom. $9.4 million compensatory, addressing Roberts's suffering, his career impact, his psychological trauma. $4.5 million punitive, sending message that federal agents cannot target whistleblowers without consequences that exceed any benefit derived from silencing internal critics. Total award, $13.9 million. Fletcher, Gomez, and Klein faced reassignment to desk positions. Careers effectively ended by their participation in retaliation operation that violated both constitutional protections and whistleblower statutes. Field office supervisor who had delayed verification was demoted, his judgment questioned for allowing detention to extend 3 hours despite having capability to verify Roberts's identity within minutes. Department of Homeland Security issued carefully worded statements about ongoing policy reviews and training updates, language crafted to avoid admission that systemic problems existed, that agencies routinely targeted those who exposed their illegal operations, that whistleblower protections meant nothing when federal agents decided someone had become problem requiring neutralization. Roberts remained with Phoenix PD another 3 years, working through trauma while case worked through inevitable appeals. He retired early, using settlement funds to establish legal defense organization for people detained by immigration enforcement, providing free attorneys and documentation assistance. Special focus on protecting whistleblowers and law enforcement who faced retaliation for exposing constitutional violations. The gas station stop became cautionary tale taught in police academies and law schools, case study in how assumptions override evidence, how profiling destroys lives, how retaliation silences truth-tellers, how even badges and decades of service don't protect you when system decides your threat to profitable collaborations that exist in gray zones beyond oversight. The legacy was accountability purchased through litigation. Precedent established through one man's refusal to accept that federal agents could detain citizens without cause, could target whistleblowers without consequences, could weaponize enforcement authority to silence those who dared challenge their overreach. In country where police lieutenant could be handcuffed at gas station not just for being brown while pumping gas, but for speaking up against corruption, Roberts's case stood as reminder that all of us are one complaint away from having to prove we belong in our own home, that documentation of citizenship means nothing when agencies decide we've become problems requiring neutralization, that justice sometimes requires juries willing to say enough and make it cost more than silence is worth.